Hello, my name is Daviana White, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the social problem of human trafficking, why we should care about it, and things that we can do to solve it. So, first off, what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is a very complex social problem. There's so many levels, so many layers, so many details to it, but the US Department of State basically describes it as a crime that involves compelling or coercing a person to provide labor or services or to engage in commercial sex acts. To simply put it, it's using various methods of manipulation like threats, empty promises, force, etc., to force someone into becoming a work or sex slave for one's own financial or personal gain. And while there are different types of human trafficking, two of the most common types are forced labor and sex trafficking. Forced labor is basically forcing people into working laborious jobs under terrible, often abusive conditions for the financial benefit of the trafficker. And a lot of times we can see this happening in agricultural fields, factories, restaurants, hotels, massage parlors, private homes, and even drug trafficking operations. And of the 27 million people who are victims of human trafficking worldwide, 3.9 million are victims of forced labor. As for sex trafficking, that's basically selling people's bodies to other humans for the buyer's sexual pleasure and the trafficker's financial or personal gain. And just like with forced labor, these are happening in private homes, massage parlors, hotels, brothels, the internet, etc. And of the 27 million victims of human trafficking worldwide, 6.3 million are victims of sex trafficking. So, who are these victims and who are these traffickers? So, the victims can be anybody of any age, race, gender, sexual orientation, background, etc. However, the US Department of State mentions that women and children are mainly the victims of human trafficking. They make up a large percentage of victim statistics. And another common characteristic of these victims is that they're usually vulnerable. Oftentimes, they were seeking love, they were seeking a better financial future for them and their family. They may have been from countries or places that were oppressive or harmful, and so they were seeking asylum. They could have even been seeking for more superficial things like fame and fortune or what have you. But the bottom line is they were often in desperate situations. And because they were so desperate to meet those needs, to meet those wants, they were willing to jump at any opportunity or any sign that, they could get what they needed or get what they wanted. As for the traffickers can also be anybody of any age, race, gender, sexual orientation, background, you name it. But a lot of times they've been found to be strangers online. They've been found to be acquaintances and friends and even family members. But oftentimes, the trafficker will have some sort of established connection or report or relationship with the victim. In the instance of somebody online, a stranger online, oftentimes they'll have talked to the victim via the internet and establish some sort of romantic or, platonic sort of friendship. But whatever the case is, the trafficker somehow knows the victim and knows their weaknesses to a certain extent, and they will use that knowledge to sort of tailor their manipulation methods to entice or coerce the victim into these types of situations. But why should we care about this? Why is human trafficking such a big deal? Why do we need to stand up and fight against it? Well, oftentimes we think of human trafficking as something that happens overseas. We think of it as more of an international problem. But the truth is, human trafficking is not just an international problem. It is a domestic problem. It is an American problem. In the United States of America, according to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, in 2021, there were 10,360 cases of human trafficking that were identified that involved 16,710 victims in total. To bring it back home to Kansas, in 2021, there were 85 cases of human trafficking that were identified with it involving 138 victims. And the Riley County Police Department declares that the highways I-70 and I-35 are often hotspots for these human trafficking operations. Um, these these numbers may not be in the hundreds of thousands, they may not be in the millions, but just the fact that they're happening at all is absolutely sickening and disgusting. And it's crazy to think that in Kansas, like these 85 cases could have been happening in the restaurants and in the stores that we frequent often. They could have been happening in our own neighborhoods, within our own communities. These could have been victims that we may not have known personally, but people that we knew them. And to think that we drive on these highways every single day just to get to work or just to get to school or just to go to the mall or what have you. And that car that we're trying to pass on these highways, the car that we're trying to, get in front of could be a car filled with victims and their traffickers. That those thoughts alone should be enough to make anybody upset and angry and uncomfortable enough to take a stand against this injustice and fight for freedom. Um, Currently, there are many efforts that have been put forth to put an end to human trafficking. Um, One of those is organizations. There are organizations like the National Human Trafficking Hotline. There are, Department of Justice, Freedom Network USA, Polaris, A21, etc. These people, these organizations are trying to spread the word about human trafficking, make people knowledgeable of it and aware of it. They're also equipping people and their forces to go out and crack down on these human trafficking operations. Also, Hollywood is taking a stand against human trafficking by producing movies such as Sound of Freedom, which basically details the horrors of human trafficking and the efforts that are being put forth to stop it. And though these efforts, these solutions they're good. They're really good. They are making progress, but they're still not enough. And the reason why these alone are not cutting it is because human trafficking isn't something that's talked about in the media. It's not talked about like climate changes. It's not talked about like celebrity gossip is. It's not talked about like the presidential election is. And because it's not something that is in the mainstream media, people aren't aware that it's happening. People don't know the extent of it. And if they don't know the extent, if they don't even know that it's happening, then they can't do anything about it because they don't know about it. So, that being said, I have three solutions that can help to bring awareness to human trafficking and ultimately stop it once and for all. Solution one is to educate. Um, there need to be online human trafficking education courses that are created that teach people what it is, how to identify it, how to protect themselves and others, who to report it to, and just other resources that are necessary to know about human trafficking. And because children are one of the main targets, one of the main victims for human trafficking, it is essential that um, this is implemented, like this type of education is implemented in schools. And one of the ways that they can do that is by making these education courses mandatory for families before enrolling children for the school year. So just like children have to take vaccines each year before they can go into school, and they have to provide proof that they did indeed take those vaccines, amongst a whole bunch of other things that they have to do before they enroll for school that year. Um, these type of education courses should be added to that list. Not only that, but because this type of trafficking is common in the workplace, it is essential for employees and just people in the business realm to also know about this. Therefore, these education courses should be mandatory training before starting a job. So just like employees have to train in the specific business that they're in, they should also be trained in recognizing and preventing human trafficking. So solution two is to focus. There is a video that the New York Times published. It's called Sex Offender Village, and it basically just details the lives of people who had committed sexual crimes and were put in prison for it. And it's just detailing their lives after prison, just trying to survive with the label of sex offender constantly following them. But one of the things that stood out in this video is the type of sex crimes that these people were in prison for, but also the length of time that they were in prison for these sex crimes. For example, some people spent like 2.5 years to 10 years in prison for having sex with a 16-year-old girlfriend, their 16-year-old girlfriend at the age of 18. Another crime was having consensual sex with a minor. And even though, according to law, these are sex crimes, these are crimes that do deserve punishment according to the law, but they're not as dangerous. They're not as um, urgent as human trafficking. They're not as urgent as somebody selling another person for their own financial gain. And it just goes to show that the police are spending their money and their effort and their time and their resources on things that are seemingly minor in comparison to other issues. So instead, what needs to happen is that money, that energy, those resources need to go into equipping the law enforcement and um, cracking down on those human trafficking operations. And room needs to be made in prison for the bigger villains, the human traffickers. So essentially, just redirect all that attention onto the more urgent situations. And then solution three is to support. We can financially support uh, organizations that stand against human trafficking, organizations like A21. By financially supporting them, they can get the resources that they need to spread the word about human trafficking, to start that conversation, to keep talking about it and make it more mainstream and something that people are hearing about constantly and are aware of constantly. And they can also get the resources that they need to strengthen their forces and strengthen their technology to be able to prevent human trafficking and to stop those operations before it gets too far. And another way that we can support is just by being there for the victims. We can be a listening ear for the victims. We can help them in their mental, emotional, psychological recovery by just being there for them, letting them know that it's okay, it's not their fault. We can just create a safe space for the victims, create a welcoming and accepting environment for them. And by doing that, a lot of them will, see that it's okay to share their story. They'll become more comfortable with sharing their story, and perhaps more victims will come forth with their story. And then them sharing their story, we can see, oh wow, like this is a real thing. Like this is not just some, way out there concept or issue. Like this is happening. If this happened to the girl down the street, it can happen to anybody, and that will make us like more apt to be like, okay, yeah, no, this stops here, not in my community, not anymore. So yeah, that is my presentation, and I just want to leave you with the thought that together we can stop human trafficking. Thank you.